In Las Vegas's Grand Garden Arena, a confident British actor turned action star was about to test his bravado against living history. What began as a glittering celebration of cinema's martial legacy turned deadly serious when Jason Statham declared himself the real action star. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical Hollywood elder. For decades, he was a 6-time world karate champion and founder of Chun Kuk Do, known for defeating opponents with efficiency so precise it bordered on myth. When Statham taunted legends with his bold claim, he had no idea he was inviting a quiet storm. Norris responded not with words but with presence, unleashing a strategic, effortless demonstration that would trigger a lesson in humility broadcast before thousands. What began as spectacle would become revelation. The Las Vegas crowd would never forget the night ego met discipline, and the silence of Chuck Norris spoke louder than any punch thrown. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas pulsed with anticipation. Thousands of fans filled every seat, their collective energy forming an electric cloud that hung beneath the rafters. Camera flashes pierced the dim lighting like lightning, illuminating banners that celebrated 50 years of action cinema. This wasn't just another fighting event, it was the Action Cinema Legacy Exhibition, where legends gathered to honor martial arts on the big screen. Mia Torres adjusted her press credentials, surveying the scene with practiced detachment. As Variety's senior entertainment reporter, she'd covered enough celebrity gatherings to know when something extraordinary might unfold. The crowd's energy felt different tonight, almost reverent. "They've pulled out all the stops," she muttered to her photographer, nodding toward the elaborate stage where a montage of iconic fight scenes played across massive screens. Half the audience paid 4 figures for tickets. Her attention shifted to the VIP section, where recognizable faces from across generations of action films sat in carefully arranged hierarchy. Her gaze paused on one particular figure, a 85-year-old man in a simple black button-up, sitting with perfect posture, his weathered face impassive beneath the signature beard that had become mythic in its own right. Chuck Norris. Not surrounded by an entourage, not playing to cameras, simply present. "Look who showed up," she whispered. But before her photographer could respond, the house lights dimmed, and the crowd erupted. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the most spectacular gathering of action legends in history." The crowd roared as a highlight reel played decades of iconic moments from martial arts cinema. Each legendary face that appeared on screen triggered waves of applause, but the decibel level reached its peak when the montage ended on a series of jaw-dropping stunts featuring one man, Jason Statham. "And now," the announcer continued, voice rising with theatrical flair, "please welcome our guest of honor, the man who redefined action for the modern era, Jason Statham." The arena exploded as spotlights converged on the entrance. Jason emerged from backstage, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, no tie, moving with the confident swagger that had become his trademark. He raised a hand to acknowledge the crowd, his expression a study in controlled charisma, neither smiling broadly nor playing aloof, but commanding attention with effortless cool. As he made his way to the stage, cameras tracked his every move. Fans reached out, hoping for a handshake, a touch, anything to connect with the star. Young fighters in the front rows stood, shouting his name. A group of MMA competitors pumped their fists. One of them, a rising star named Kai Anderson, cupping his hands around his mouth to shout, "The real deal." Jason took the microphone, waiting for the noise to settle. The silence that eventually fell carried its own electricity. "Been quite a journey," he began, his gravelly British accent cutting through the room. "From diving competitions to action films. Who'd have thought? A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the crowd. He paced the stage casually, like a predator comfortable in its territory. They asked me to say a few words about action cinema, about its legacy. He paused, scanning the audience. But legacy is a funny thing, isn't it? It's not just about what came before, it's about who carries the torch forward. The crowd hung on each word, the younger fans especially rapt. I've been lucky enough to work with some incredible people, Jason continued. Stunt teams, directors, fellow actors who pushed me to go further, harder, faster. He stopped pacing, planting his feet firmly. But there's something different about what we do now, something that separates us from what came before. A murmur traveled through the older section of the crowd, where veterans of the industry sat straighter in their seats. In my films, Jason said, voice dropping to a compelling near whisper that somehow carried to every corner. When you see me jumping off a building or fighting 5 blokes at once, that's not camera tricks or stunt doubles taking the hard falls. He tapped his chest. That's me. Real sweat. Real risk. Real action. The younger portion of the crowd erupted, while scattered applause came from the industry veterans. In the VIP section, several legendary faces exchanged glances. So, when people ask what makes an action star in 2025, Jason continued, growing bolder, I'd say it's about bringing authenticity back to the genre. Being the real deal. He raised his chin slightly. And I'm proud to stand here as the real action star of our time. The declaration landed like a thunderclap. The arena exploded into noise, many fans on their feet, chanting his name, while others applauded politely, expressions more reserved. In the press section, Mia's fingers flew across her tablet. Statham throws down the gauntlet, she typed, claiming the action crown in a room full of legends. The announcer bounded back on stage, feeding on the electricity of the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Statham. What a statement from our guest of honor. Jason offered a slight bow, soaking in the adulation. As he made his way back to his seat in the front row, the spotlights followed, illuminating his path like a conquering hero's return. But in the controlled chaos of the moment, few noticed the subtle shift in the VIP section. Chuck Norris sat exactly as before. Posture unchanged. Expression serene. Only the slightest tilt of his head indicated he'd registered Jason's claim at all. Yet something in his eyes had sharpened not anger or offense, but the quiet focus of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of measured response. Kai Anderson, the young MMA fighter, leaned over to his training partner. Man, Statham's not wrong. Those old-school guys had it easy, with all the camera tricks and wires. Today's action is the real deal. The veteran trainer sitting behind them, a grizzled man named Frank Morgan, who'd worked with martial artists since the 70s, overheard the comment. He glanced toward Chuck Norris, then back to the young fighters. Careful, son, he said softly. Some legends don't need to tell you how real they are. Back on stage, the announcer continued with the program, introducing a demonstration of choreographed fight sequences. But the energy in the room had shifted. Jason's declaration had drawn a line between eras, between philosophies. Most didn't notice that the most significant response wasn't vocal at all. It was in the thoughtful silence of a man who had once been named World Karate Champion 6 consecutive times before ever stepping in front of a karate champion. Camera. Mia Torres noticed, though. She'd been watching Chuck Norris when Jason made his claim. She noted how the legendary martial artist hadn't flinched, hadn't scoffed, hadn't shown any outward reaction except that barely perceptible sharpening of focus. As a journalist who'd built her reputation on recognizing pivotal moments before they fully materialized, she sensed a story unfolding beneath the surface spectacle. Keep your camera ready, she told her photographer. I think the real show hasn't started yet. As the evening progressed through demonstrations and tributes, a curious undercurrent began to flow through the arena. Whispers spread. Glances shifted between Jason, sitting confidently in the front row, and Chuck, still composed in the VIP section. Two generations of action stars. Two philosophies of strength. Two approaches to legacy. The crowd, sensing something brewing beneath the surface, grew increasingly restless with anticipation. By the time the announcer returned to introduce the next segment, the atmosphere had transformed. What had begun as a celebration of cinema now felt like the prelude to something unprecedented, history being written in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer called out, riding the wave of energy. This evening is all about bringing together the greatest talents in action, cinema history, and what better way to continue than with some live demonstrations from the masters themselves. The crowd roared its approval. In the front row, Jason straightened, a half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth. So, the announcer continued, his voice dropping dramatically. Is there anyone in our audience of legends who'd like to respond to our guest of honor's bold statement, perhaps with a demonstration of their own? And just like that, the spark was struck. The question hung in the air. An invitation. A challenge. A match held to kindling. All eyes began to scan the VIP section. And slowly, almost in unison, they settled on one man. The silence that followed the announcer's invitation stretched beyond comfort, becoming its own form of tension. Spotlights swept across the VIP section. Cameras panning over the assembled legends. Some shifted in their seats, others exchanged glances. But none stood. Jason Statham rose casually from his front row seat, confident smile in place, and returned to the stage. Taking the microphone, he paced with easy swagger. Come on then, he said, voice playful, but with an unmistakable edge. Surely someone wants to show me how it's done properly? He gestured toward the VIP section. We've got legends in the house. Multiple generations of action stars. The crowd stirred, a mixture of cheers and uncertain murmurs. No takers? Jason continued, eyebrows raised. Well, can't say I blame you. Things have changed since the golden days, haven't they? Training's more intense now. Expectations higher. He winked at the audience. Insurance premiums too. Scattered laughter rippled through the arena. Jason was playing the moment perfectly charismatic, cheeky, challenging without seeming arrogant. In the press section, Mia Torres watched the theater unfold with practiced skepticism. He's good, she muttered to herself, setting up the old guard to either look cowardly for not responding or foolish for trying to match him. Across the arena, Kai Anderson, the young MMA fighter, cupped his hands around his mouth. No one's stepping up, Jason. Guess that answers who the real action star is. More cheers erupted from the younger audience members. The energy shifted again. What had been playful provocation now carried a sharper edge. Jason acknowledged the support with a nod. Look, it's all love and respect. We all contributed to the legacy in different ways. But if anyone wants to compare notes on what makes a real action performance in 2025, he spread his arms wide. The floor is yours. The announcer, sensing the perfect storm brewing, stepped closer. Well, folks, seems like our guest of honor has thrown down the gauntlet. Is there anyone who wants to? Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. The chant began somewhere in the middle sections, tentative at first, then gathering strength as it spread through the arena. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. All eyes turned to the VIP section, where Chuck Norris remained seated, hands resting lightly on his knees, expression unchanged. The chanting grew louder, more insistent. Jason's confident smile flickered almost imperceptibly. He hadn't anticipated this specific turn. Chuck Norris, he acknowledged, nodding respectfully toward the VIP section. Now there's a legend among legends. Created his own martial art, dominated competitions, then conquered the screen. His tone remained light, playful. Though I think the last time he had to do his own stunts, Reagan was president. The joke landed unevenly. Some laughter, some uncomfortable shifting. The chanting continued. Chuck! 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 In the VIP section, nothing changed for several long seconds. Chuck sat motionless, neither acknowledging the chants nor meeting Jason's gaze. The veteran martial artist's stillness created its own gravity, drawing all attention despite his lack of movement. Frank Morgan, the old trainer, leaned forward in his seat. Now we'll see something, he whispered, eyes fixed on Chuck. Then, with deliberate calm, Chuck Norris stood. The arena erupted cheers, applause, stomping feet. Phones lifted everywhere, capturing the moment. The chanting swelled. Chuck! 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 But Chuck himself made no acknowledgement of the noise. He simply stood, straight-backed and steady, gaze fixed on Jason. No smile. No frown. No visible emotion at all. Just focused presence. Jason, master of his own image, recovered quickly. He grinned broadly, arms spread wide in welcome. Chuck Norris, ladies and gentlemen. The man, the myth, the legend. The announcer bounded across the stage, overcome with excitement. Are we actually witnessing this? The greatest martial artist of the 20th century, responding to our guest of honor's challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, this is unprecedented. Still, Chuck made no theatrical gestures. He simply began walking unhurried, measured steps carrying him down from the VIP section. The crowd parted before him like water. No one reached out to touch him or called for his attention. There was something in his deliberate movement that commanded a different kind of respect. Mia Torres's fingers flew across her tablet. Norris responds to Statham's provocation not with words but with presence, embodying the contrast between their approaches before any demonstration begins. As Chuck made his way toward the stage, the arena fell into an expectant hush. Even those who had been most vocal moments before now watched in silence. Everyone sensed that something momentous was unfolding, not just entertainment, but a genuine collision of eras and philosophies. Kai Anderson, who had been Statham's most vocal supporter, found himself leaning forward, breath held. Beside him, Frank Morgan nodded slowly. Watch carefully, son, the veteran trainer murmured. You're about to see the difference between someone who performs martial arts and someone who lives them. On stage, Jason maintained his confident posture, but those closest could see a new alertness in his eyes, the instinctive recognition of a genuine challenge. He stepped forward as Chuck approached the stairs. Chuck Norris. Everyone, Jason announced, extending a hand as Chuck reached the stage. An absolute honor, sir. For the first time, Chuck's expression changed, a slight nod, the ghost of a smile as he shook Jason's hand. The gesture was respectful but measured, neither overly warm nor coldly formal. The announcer, barely containing his excitement, rushed forward with a second microphone, offering it to Chuck. Chuck glanced at it but made no move to take it. The moment stretched uncomfortably until the announcer awkwardly lowered the microphone. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not one for speeches, I guess, Jason said, smoothly filling the silence. Man of action, right? He turned to the crowd with a grin. That's something we have in common. Scattered laughter, though muted, compared to earlier. The atmosphere had shifted again, the theatrical spectacle now giving way to something more authentic, more unpredictable. So, Jason continued, addressing Chuck directly now. The announcer mentioned demonstrations. Bit of friendly competition between generations, perhaps? Show these good people how it's done, your era and mine? Chuck considered this for a moment, then gave a single nod. Just that, no words, no flourish, no playing to the crowd. One deliberate nod. The simple gesture sent ripples of excitement through the arena. Phones lifted higher, social media feeds exploding with real-time updates. The announcer, recognizing a historic moment in the making, stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we're about to witness something truly special. Two icons of action cinema, separated by generation, but united in their mastery, will give us a demonstration right here, right now. Crew members rushed to clear space on the stage. The arena's energy built toward fever pitch. Jason removed his jacket, handing it to a stagehand with a flourish. Beneath it, his physique was evident even through his shirt, the product of rigorous training regimens and disciplined living. He rolled his shoulders, bounced lightly on his feet, giving the crowd what they expected. Preparation as performance. Chuck made no such display. He simply stood, hands at his sides, watching Jason with the patient focus of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of stillness before action. I should warn you, Jason said, voice pitched to carry to the audience. I still train every day. Mixed disciplines, endurance work, the lot. Don't go easy on me. His tone was respectful but carried an unmistakable confidence. Chuck's response was characteristically minimal. Another slight nod. Nothing more. The contrast between them could not have been more stark. Jason in motion, playing to the crowd, radiating charisma and physical prowess. Chuck still, economical, present, without performance. Mia Torres captured it in a single line. Before a single move is exchanged, the philosophical battle is already visible. Statham's dynamic showmanship versus Norris's quiet mastery. The announcer stepped between them briefly. Just to be clear, gentlemen, this is a friendly demonstration. Yes? No one's looking to send anyone to the hospital tonight. Absolutely, Jason agreed quickly. Just showing the fans what real action looks like then and now. He glanced at Chuck, with a smile that didn't quite mask his competitive edge. Chuck simply nodded again, eyes never leaving Jason. Very well. The announcer backed away, arms raised dramatically. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for a once-in-a-lifetime demonstration. In this corner, representing the new school of authentic action, Jason Statham. The crowd roared, younger fans especially vocal. And in this corner, the legend himself, martial arts pioneer and icon Chuck Norris. The cheer that followed seemed to shake the arena's foundations. The announcer retreated from the stage entirely, leaving just the two men facing each other in the cleared space. Spotlights tightened around them, creating an impromptu ring bathed in stark white light. For a moment, nothing happened. They stood 3 yards apart, measuring each other in silence. The crowd's energy hung suspended, collective breath held. Then Jason, always aware of pacing and audience expectation, smiled and raised his hands into a fighting stance, a hybrid position that showcased his mixed training background. Whenever you're ready, sir, he said, voice carrying just enough to be heard in the front rows. Chuck remained motionless for another beat, then slowly, deliberately raised his hands into the distinctive stance of his own creation, the foundation of Chun Kuk Do. And just like that, Without announcement or theatrical build-up, the challenge was engaged. Jason moved first, stepping forward with the fluid confidence that had become his trademark. His footwork was precise, each step calculated yet appearing natural, the hallmark of thousands of hours of training transformed into muscle memory. He circled left, hands raised in a guard position that borrowed elements from both boxing and Wing Chun. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice carried over the sound system, though he remained off stage. "What we're witnessing is truly historic. A friendly demonstration between two generations of action cinema mastery." The crowd's roar faded to an expectant hush as Jason initiated the first exchange. He threw a testing jab, quick, sharp, but clearly held back more performance than attack. Chuck deflected it with minimal movement, his forearm barely shifting to redirect the punch's energy. Jason nodded appreciatively, a half-smile playing at his lips. He stepped back, bounced twice on the balls of his feet, then launched a more complex combination. Jab, cross, followed by a spinning elbow that stopped just short of contact. The sequence was impressive, fast, technically sound, visually dynamic. Exactly what his films had made famous. The younger section of the crowd responded with appreciative cheers. Kai Anderson punched his training partner's shoulder. "See that? Textbook Statham right there." Chuck's response was economy itself. He slipped the jab, blocked the cross with a subtle parry, and simply wasn't there when the elbow came around, having shifted his weight backward just enough that the strike found empty air. No wasted motion, no flourish, just efficient, practiced movement. Frank Morgan nodded slowly. "Watch his feet," he murmured to the young fighters seated near him. "Norris hasn't moved more than 6 inches in any direction. Maximum effect, minimum effort." On stage, Jason reset, nodding again with professional respect. But a new intensity had entered his eyes. The demonstration was friendly, but pride was now engaged. He circled again, this time adding a feint, before launching a lightning-fast kick aimed at mid-height. Chuck blocked it with a textbook forearm shield, the impact making a sharp sound that carried through the arena. For the first time, he countered a simple front push kick that stopped precisely 1 inch from Jason's solar plexus. Perfect distance control. Perfect timing. No excess force or showmanship. A ripple of appreciation moved through the older martial artists in the audience. They recognized what they were seeing. Decades of disciplined training distilled into pure functional movement. Jason felt it too. His expression shifted subtly, the performer giving way to the martial artist. He stepped back, reassessing. The next sequence he launched was less theatrical, more authentic, a combination he might use in actual sparring rather than on camera. Jab, cross, hook, leg kick, each strike sharp, technically sound. Chuck's defense remained minimal, but flawless. He slipped, blocked, parried, and checked, each movement precise, nothing wasted. When he countered this time, it was with a 3-strike combination executed so quickly that many in the audience missed it entirely. Only those with trained eyes saw the lightning sequence. Palm heel, straight punch, roundhouse kick, each stopping just short of contact. In the press section, Mia Torres watched with growing fascination. "It's like watching 2 different languages," she murmured to her photographer. Statham speaking in exclamation points. Norris in perfect, simple sentences. The contrast was becoming increasingly apparent. Jason's style was dynamic, athletic, visually impressive. Martial arts evolved for the camera and modern audience expectations. Chuck's approach was distilled, refined through decades to eliminate anything unnecessary. Martial arts as functional discipline rather than spectacle. Jason, sensing the shift in the crowd's perception, elevated his performance. He launched into a sequence that had become famous from his films, a complex combination of strikes followed by a grappling takedown that traditionally left opponents neutralized in seconds. The moves came fast and fluid, each flowing into the next with choreographed precision. The crowd gasped, then cheered. This was what they had come to see: authentic action, real skill, star power in motion. But something unexpected happened. As Jason executed the sequence, Chuck didn't just defend, he systematically dismantled each element. A subtle shift made an impressive punch miss by millimeters. A nearly imperceptible weight transfer nullified what should have been an effective sweep. When Jason moved to execute the signature takedown, Chuck simply wasn't where physics dictated he should be. The sequence ended with Jason slightly off balance, his momentum carried forward into empty space, while Chuck stood exactly where he had begun, having moved perhaps a total of 12 inches throughout the entire exchange. A murmur rippled through the arena. Those with martial arts experience leaned forward in their seats. Something remarkable was happening, not a competition of strength or speed, but a masterclass in the difference between performance and mastery. Kai Anderson's confident expression had faded to one of confusion, then dawning respect. "How did he?" he whispered. Frank Morgan leaned forward. "Efficiency," he said quietly. "Norris isn't trying to look good. He's just being good." On stage, Jason reset once more. The consummate professional, acknowledging a challenge greater than anticipated. His next approach was more measured. He circled with new respect in his eyes, studying Chuck with the focus of a student rather than the confidence of a star. He launched another combination, this one stripped of theatrical elements. Pure, functional, martial arts. Fast, direct, powerful. The kind of sequence that would work in a real confrontation rather than playing to camera angles. Chuck's response elevated. His defensive movements remained minimal, but now his counters came with each exchange, not showy, but devastatingly precise. A strike that stopped a millimeter from contact. A sweep that brushed Jason's ankle just enough to communicate that balance could have been taken. A palm heel that paused exactly at the point where forward momentum would have become impact. The message was clear to anyone with trained eyes. Chuck was demonstrating not just defensive mastery, but complete control of the exchange. He wasn't competing with Jason, he was teaching him. In the audience, the atmosphere shifted again. The younger fans who had cheered Jason's dynamic performance now watched in dawning wonder. The veterans nodded in quiet validation. This wasn't a battle of who could look more impressive. It was a living demonstration of the difference between martial arts as entertainment and martial arts as lifelong discipline. Mia Torres typed rapidly. What began as spectacle has transformed into something more profound. A visual essay on the nature of true mastery versus performance, with neither man speaking a single word throughout. Jason, to his credit, recognized what was happening. His expression shifted from competitive focus to something more humble. The face of a man encountering a level of skill that transcended his own understanding. He continued engaging, but now, his approach had changed. He wasn't trying to showcase his abilities but to learn from the exchange. Chuck seemed to recognize this shift, and his own approach subtly changed in response. His counters became more instructive, each one demonstrating a principle rather than establishing dominance. When Jason executed a technically sound strike, Chuck would offer the ghost of a nod before responding. They continued this dance for several minutes, the demonstration evolving into something no one had anticipated, not a competition between stars, but a silent conversation between martial artists. The crowd watched in increasingly respectful silence, sensing they were witnessing something rare and authentic. Finally, Jason launched one last combination, his most technical, most grounded sequence yet. No flash, no camera-ready elements, just clean, disciplined martial arts. As he completed the sequence, he stepped back and, in a gesture that spoke volumes, bowed slightly to Chuck. Chuck returned the bow, the movement carrying decades of tradition. And just like that, the demonstration concluded not with a dramatic finish or flashy knockout, but with mutual respect between practitioners. The arena erupted into applause. Not the raucous cheering of earlier, but something deeper, more reverent, the sound of thousands, recognizing they had witnessed something authentic and meaningful. Jason extended his hand. Chuck took it, and for the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face, small, contained, but unmistakably warm. "Thank you," Jason said, voice low enough that only Chuck and those in the front rows could hear. "That was educational." Chuck nodded once, still holding Jason's hand. "You have good foundations," he said. His first words of the evening. His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of decades of experience. But remember, the most powerful technique is invisible until needed. With that simple exchange, they turned to acknowledge the crowd together. Side by side they stood, different generations, different approaches, different philosophies united in the discipline that had defined their lives. In the press section, Mia's fingers hovered above her tablet. The story had transformed before her eyes. What had begun as celebrity spectacle had become something worthy of deeper reflection. She began to type again. In an era of carefully curated public images and social media personas, tonight the audience witnessed something increasingly rare, an authentic moment of humility and growth, played out not through words but through the ancient language of martial discipline. As Jason and Chuck left the stage together, the crowd continued their standing ovation. But something had changed in how they watched Jason, less as an idol to be cheered, more as a man on a journey they now better understood. Frank Morgan nodded to himself, then turned to Kai and the other young fighters. "Remember this," he said quietly. Norris didn't have to say he was the real deal. He simply was. The backstage area of the Grand Garden Arena buzzed with activity. Event staff rushed about, celebrities mingled in the green room, and media representatives jostled for position, hoping to secure exclusive comments from the evening's most talked-about participants. Jason Statham stood near the refreshment table, water bottle in hand, surrounded by a small circle of admirers and industry figures, offering congratulations. His expression remained composed, but those who knew him well could detect the subtle signs of inner turbulence, a slight tightness around his eyes, a contemplative distance in his gaze. "Brilliant showing, Jason," a studio executive gushed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Social media's absolutely exploding. Statham's Norris is trending worldwide." Jason nodded, took a measured sip of water. "Appreciate it. You guys should take that on the road," someone else suggested with a laugh. "Sell out arenas across the country." More congratulations followed, more praise for the spectacle. But Jason's responses grew increasingly brief. His gaze kept drifting across the room to where Chuck Norris sat quietly on a folding chair, declining interviews, occasionally nodding to those who approached with reverence, but maintaining the same calm self-containment he'd displayed on stage. Mia Torres, ever observant, had positioned herself strategically between the two men, noting their contrasting post-demonstration behaviors. Jason surrounded yet somehow isolated. Chuck solitary, yet completely at peace. When the crowd around Jason momentarily thinned, she approached, recorder in hand. "Mr. Statham, Mia Torres from Variety. May I ask you a few questions about what just happened out there?" Jason studied her briefly, seeming to weigh something internally, then nodded. "Sure." But let's step over here. He gestured toward a quieter corner. Once they were relatively secluded, Mia activated her recorder. That demonstration took an unexpected turn, she began. What was going through your mind during those exchanges? Jason was quiet for a moment. Uncharacteristically thoughtful. You know, he finally said. In my films, we rehearse every sequence for weeks. Multiple camera angles, perfect lighting, 20 takes to get it right. Out there with Chuck. He shook his head slightly. That was something else entirely. How so? He wasn't performing, Jason said simply. Not for the crowd, not for himself, not for anyone. Every movement came from somewhere deeper, decades of discipline distilled into pure efficiency. He gazed across the room toward Chuck. I've trained with some of the best fighters in the world, but I've never felt what I felt out there tonight. Which was? Jason considered the question carefully. Complete control without dominance. Complete confidence without ego. He paused. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it firsthand. Mia nodded, sensing she was witnessing a rare moment of genuine reflection from a star typically guarded with the press. You said earlier this evening that you represent the real action star of our time. Has that perspective changed after this exchange? The question hung between them. In the background, the bustling activity of the backstage area continued. But in their corner, a pocket of contemplative silence had formed. I meant what I said about doing my own stunts, about bringing authenticity back to action films, Jason finally responded. But out there with Chuck, he shook his head again. I realized I've been confusing authenticity with visibility. He showed me there's a deeper level, something beyond what plays well on camera or generates headlines. Before Mia could follow up, they were interrupted by Kai Anderson, the young MMA fighter who had been Jason's most vocal supporter earlier in the evening. His confident demeanor had given way to a more subdued, almost reverent approach. Mr. Statham, he said, extending his hand. Wanted to say it was an honor watching you work tonight. Jason shook his hand. Appreciate that. I actually came to ask. Kai hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. Do you think Mr. Norris would mind if I introduced myself? I've been competing professionally for 3 years now. And what I saw tonight was… He trailed off, searching for words. Life? Changing? Jason suggested, with the ghost of a smile. Kai nodded, grateful for the understanding. Come on, Jason said. I'd like to speak with him again myself. Mia watched as they crossed the room together. Noting how the crowd seemed to instinctively part before them, Chuck looked up as they approached, his expression revealing nothing. Mr. Norris, Jason began. This young man wanted to introduce himself. Kai Anderson, he's making quite a name for himself in MMA. Chuck nodded to the young fighter, who seemed suddenly at a loss for words in the presence of the legend. Sir, Kai finally managed. I just wanted to say thank you. What you showed us tonight was… He shook his head, still struggling to articulate the impact. Keep training, Chuck said simply. Not for cameras. Not for glory. For discipline. Just 7 words, but delivered with such quiet authority that Kai straightened involuntarily, as if receiving wisdom directly from a master. Yes, sir, he responded, with none of the brash confidence he'd displayed earlier. As Kai stepped back, visibly processing the encounter, Jason took the opportunity to address Chuck directly. I owe you an apology, he said, voice low enough that only those closest could hear. Chuck shook his head slightly. No apology needed. Every martial artist walks their own path. Still, Jason persisted, what I said up there about being the real action star, it came from a place of… He paused, searching for the right word. Pride. Chuck supplied. Without judgment. Jason nodded, accepting the assessment. Yes. Pride. Pride has its place, Chuck said. It fuels excellence. But it must be balanced with humility, or it becomes weakness. The wisdom of the statement hung in the air between them. From her position nearby, Mia observed the interaction with growing fascination. This wasn't the manufactured drama of publicity stunts or the carefully managed image control typical of celebrity encounters. This was something raw and genuine, a moment of transformation happening before her eyes. I'd like to learn more, Jason said finally. If you're willing to share. Chuck studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. The first lesson already happened, he said. Out there on the stage. What was it? That true strength isn't about who's watching, Chuck said quietly. It's about who you are when no one is watching at all. 20 minutes later, the exhibition's main event was underway. A choreographed showcase featuring up-and-coming martial artists performing elaborate fight sequences that drew appreciative cheers from the crowd. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the evening's highlight. The culmination of months of planning and promotion. But the unexpected demonstration between Jason and Chuck had transformed the night's narrative entirely. What was meant to be a celebration of action, cinema had become a living lesson in martial philosophy. One that continued to unfold away from the spotlight. In a secluded corner of the arena's private training area, far from cameras and crowds, two men faced each other on a simple practice mat. The space was utilitarian basic equipment, mirrored walls, a few training dummies in the corner, nothing fancy. No elaborate lighting, no music, no special effects, just the essentials needed for authentic practice. No audience was present except for a handful of observers who had been quietly invited. Kai Anderson and his training partner, Frank Morgan, the veteran trainer, and Mia Torres, who had been granted exclusive access on the condition that everything remained off-record until approved. They sat silently against the wall, witnesses to something few would ever see: a private transmission of knowledge from master to student. Jason had changed from his tailored suit into training clothes, a simple black t-shirt and gray track pants. The transformation was striking. Without the carefully crafted public image, he seemed somehow more authentic, more present. Chuck remained in his button-up and slacks, having declined the offer to change. The clothes don't make the martial artist, he had said simply when Jason suggested more appropriate attire might be comfortable. They stood 3 yards apart, just as they had on stage, but the energy was entirely different. This wasn't performance. This wasn't spectacle. This was transmission knowledge passing from one generation to another through the ancient language of movement and discipline. Most people think martial arts is about fighting, Chuck said, breaking the reverent silence that had settled over the room. His voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable weight of decades of experience. It's not. It's about developing yourself. He moved into a basic stance. Feet, shoulder, width, apart. Weight perfectly distributed. Hands relaxed at his sides. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, yet somehow commanding complete attention. Show me your guard position again. Jason complied, settling into the hybrid stance he'd displayed earlier, a blend of boxing and Wing Chun influences. Technically sound, balanced, effective. The stance that had served him well through countless action sequences and training sessions. Chuck studied it with patient focus, then approached. With gentle precision, he made 3 minor adjustments, shifting Jason's weight distribution slightly back toward the center line, adjusting his lead elbow position by perhaps an inch inward, changing the angle of his rear foot by 5 degrees. Now, feel the difference, Chuck instructed, stepping back. Jason's eyes widened slightly as he settled into the adjusted position. Something had changed. Though visually, the difference was nearly imperceptible. It's less effort, he said, surprise evident in his voice. More stable, but he shifted his weight experimentally. Also, more mobile. Exactly. Chuck returned to his position. Efficiency, not how it looks, but how it works. He gestured for Jason to throw a basic punch. Jason did so, a clean, technical strike with proper form. The kind that would look good on camera while still being fundamentally sound. Again, Chuck said. But this time, don't think about the punch. Think about your center. Jason looked confused but nodded. He reset, took a breath, then threw the punch again, focusing on his core rather than his fist. Better, Chuck said. One more time. Now don't think about striking me. Think about projecting energy through me. Jason's third attempt looked nearly identical to the previous ones to untrained observers. But those watching closely, Frank Morgan especially, noticed the subtle difference. The punch carried a different quality, less about impact, more about energy transfer. The movement originated deeper in Jason's body, flowing outward rather than being generated primarily by the shoulder and arm. That's it, Chuck said, the ghost of a smile appearing. You feel the difference? Jason nodded slowly, studying his own fist as if seeing it for the first time. It's like the punch becomes secondary to something else. Intent, Chuck confirmed. Most fighters focus on technique. Masters focus on intent. He moved into position again, centering himself with a deep breath. When I was competing, reporters always asked about my training routine. How many hours? How many repetitions? They missed the point. He demonstrated a simple roundhouse kick, minimal movement, perfect balance, devastating potential. Nothing like the exaggerated, camera-ready kicks seen in most action films, but carrying a quality of lethal efficiency that made it somehow more impressive. It's not about quantity, it's about quality of attention. From the sidelines, Kai Anderson watched with growing fascination. The brash confidence that had defined him earlier in the evening had given way to something more receptive, more humble. He leaned toward Frank Morgan. I've been doing it wrong all this time, haven't I? He whispered. Frank nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the two men on the mat. Most do. Fighting for cameras isn't the same as mastering the art. But Statham's successful, Kai countered, though his tone was questioning rather than defensive. His films make millions. Success and mastery aren't always the same thing. Frank replied quietly. What you're watching is someone who achieved one now, discovering the path to the other. On the mat, the lesson continued. Chuck guided Jason through a series of basic movements, nothing flashy, nothing that would impress a casual observer, but each containing layers of subtle refinement that transformed their essential nature. Balance doesn't come from stance, Chuck explained as they worked through a simple sidestep. It comes from centeredness, mental first, then physical. He demonstrated, moving with fluid precision despite his age. When your mind is balanced, your body follows. Jason absorbed each lesson with increasing receptivity, his initial competitive edge giving way to genuine students' curiosity. Each exchange revealed another layer of Chuck's philosophy: efficiency over flash, substance over appearance, mastery as an internal journey rather than external validation. In my first film, Chuck said as they reset for another sequence, the director wanted me to make my kicks more dramatic, higher, flashier, said it would look better on camera. He demonstrated a perfectly executed side kick that stopped precisely at chest height. I refused. Told him authenticity would resonate more than theatrics. Did it? Jason asked, genuinely curious. My films weren't the flashiest, Chuck acknowledged with a slight shrug. Never had the biggest budgets or the most elaborate effects. But 50 years later, people still watch them. Not for special effects or camera tricks. For authentic mastery. He paused, studying Jason thoughtfully. Your generation faced different pressures. Higher expectations for spectacle. More competition for attention. I understand why performance became central. Jason nodded, appreciating the lack of judgment in Chuck's observation. In my early films, directors would say, again, but bigger. More dynamic. More impressive. He mimicked an exaggerated stance. Eventually, you start thinking that's what the art is supposed to be. It's not your fault, Chuck said simply, but it is your opportunity to find balance now. Mia Torres, observing silently from her position against the wall, found herself taking notes, not as a journalist, but as someone witnessing something profound. The story had transcended entertainment news or celebrity profiles. What she was watching was the passing of a philosophical torch wisdom flowing from one generation to the next through direct transmission. The lesson continued, moving from physical technique into deeper philosophical waters. Chuck spoke little, preferring to demonstrate principles through movement rather than explanation. When he did speak, his words were direct, unadorned with unnecessary elaboration. The ego seeks recognition, he said at one point, after guiding Jason through a complex evasion sequence. The spirit seeks truth. When they align, when you do what is authentic regardless of who's watching, that's when mastery begins. After 30 minutes of instruction, Chuck stepped back. Show me the sequence again, he said, referring to the combination Jason had performed during their public demonstration. But this time, focus on necessity, nothing extra. Jason nodded, centering himself. He took a deep breath, finding the mental stillness Chuck had emphasized. Then he executed the sequence, the same technical moves, but transformed. Gone were the elements designed for visual impact. The flourishes meant to impress an audience. What remained was pure, functional martial arts. Efficient, grounded, purposeful. The difference was striking. Earlier, the sequence had been impressive, a showcase of skill and athletic ability. Now, it carried a different quality altogether, not a performance but a genuine expression of martial intent. Not a demonstration of what Jason could do, but a revelation of who he was. When he finished, silence hung in the room. Even those observing could feel the difference, though they might struggle to articulate exactly what had changed. Chuck nodded once, a gesture that conveyed more approval than effusive praise ever could. That, he said quietly, is the real action star. The words landed with impact far beyond their volume. Coming from anyone else, they might have seemed like empty flattery or polite encouragement. Coming from Chuck Norris, a man whose entire career embodied the philosophy he taught, they carried the weight of genuine recognition. Jason bowed, the gesture coming naturally rather than as performance. Thank you, he said simply. One more thing, Chuck said, moving to the center of the mat. Attack me again. Full speed. Full intention. Jason hesitated, then nodded. He centered himself, finding the focus Chuck had been teaching, then launched forward with his most technical combination jab. Cross, spinning elbow, followed by a sweeping low kick designed to unbalance an opponent. What happened next occurred so quickly that those watching struggled to process it. Chuck seemed to barely move, yet somehow Jason's attack met nothing but empty air. The spinning elbow, which should have forced Chuck to retreat or block dramatically, somehow found itself redirected by the slightest contact. The leg sweep, which should have at least forced a significant evasion, was nullified by a weight shift so subtle it was nearly invisible. The sequence ended with Jason slightly off balance, momentum carried forward into empty space, while Chuck stood almost exactly where he had begun, having moved perhaps a total of 6 inches throughout the entire exchange. The demonstration wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. There was no knockout moment. No cinematic climax. Yet somehow it carried more impact than any choreographed fight scene could have achieved. It was the quiet culmination of decades of disciplined practice mastery, so complete it appeared effortless. Jason straightened, a look of profound realization crossing his face. For years, he had prided himself on performing his own stunts, on bringing authentic physical prowess to his roles. Yet here was a different kind of authenticity altogether. One that transcended performance entirely. How? He began, then stopped, recognizing that the question itself revealed how much he still had to learn. Chuck seemed to understand. Time, he said simply. Not just years of practice, moments of complete presence, accumulated daily. He moved to the edge of the mat. Meditation. Reflection. The physical is just the visible surface of the discipline. The lesson concluded with no fanfare, no dramatic finale, just as their public demonstration had ended. Chuck offered a few final words of guidance, speaking not just to Jason but to everyone present. The path of martial arts has 3 stages, he said, his voice quiet but clear. First, you train to impress others. Then, you train to impress yourself. Finally, you train because it's who you are, no audience needed. He looked directly at Jason. Most never reach the 3rd stage, but that's where true mastery begins. The simplicity of the statement belied its profound truth. In a culture obsessed with visibility, with likes and shares and constant performance, Chuck offered a radical alternative. A path of discipline valued for its own sake, not for external validation. As they prepared to return to the public areas of the arena, Kai Anderson stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Norris," he said, "could I ask one question?" Chuck nodded, his attention shifting to the young fighter with the same focused presence he'd given Jason. "You've accomplished everything: championships, movie stardom, business success. What kept you disciplined through it all? What was your motivation when you already had everything?" Chuck considered the question carefully, taking his time despite the busy schedule awaiting them all. "The mirror," he finally said. "The mirror?" Kai repeated, confused. "Each morning, I face myself in the mirror," Chuck explained. "Not my public image, not my reputation, not the character from jokes or movie posters. Just me. That person knows the truth whether I've compromised my discipline or maintained it." He glanced toward Jason. "Fame is fleeting. Fortune comes and goes. But who you are, when no one is watching, that endures." The wisdom of the statement resonated through the room like a bell tone, clear and penetrating. Jason nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson on a level deeper than intellectual understanding. Mia made a final note, knowing she had witnessed something few journalists ever would: authentic transformation rather than curated image management. As they prepared to leave, Jason turned to Chuck one last time. "I'd like to continue learning," he said, a request that would have seemed unthinkable just hours earlier. "If you're willing to teach." Chuck studied him for a moment, gauging his sincerity. There was no immediate response, no quick acceptance, just thoughtful consideration. Then he nodded once. "My dojo in California," he said. "Next month. No cameras, no publicity. Just training." Jason agreed, understanding completely. "I'll be there." They shook hands, no longer as competitors from different eras, but as practitioners on the same path at different stages of the journey. Frank Morgan watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. He turned to Kai, and the other young fighters who had witnessed the lesson. "Remember this moment," he said softly. "This is how legends are made, not through boasting, but through humility in the face of greater wisdom." As they all prepared to return to the public event, Mia approached Jason. "May I include some of what happened here in my coverage?" she asked. "I think it's a story worth telling." Jason considered this, then nodded. "Yes," he said. "But not as celebrity drama. As something more meaningful. A lesson in genuine mastery," Mia suggested. "Exactly," Jason agreed, because that's what it was. Together, they made their way back toward the main arena, where the bright lights and cheering crowds awaited. But something fundamental had shifted. The facade had been broken, not shattered dramatically, but gently dismantled to reveal something more authentic beneath. And in that authenticity lay the evening's true victory. 3 hours later, the Action Cinema Legacy exhibition was coming to its scheduled close. The final demonstrations had concluded, celebrities had given their planned remarks, and the crowd was beginning to thin as fans filed toward the exits, buzzing with excitement about all they had witnessed. The night had delivered the spectacle they'd paid for: elaborate fight choreography, appearances by beloved stars, nostalgic montages of iconic scenes from decades of action films. But the story that dominated every conversation wasn't what had been meticulously planned and rehearsed. It was the unscripted encounter between Jason Statham and Chuck Norris. A moment of authentic martial arts philosophy that had transcended entertainment to become something approaching wisdom. As people left the arena, they weren't just discussing what they had seen, they were debating what it meant. "Did you see how Norris barely moved?" a teenage fan asked his father as they navigated the crowded concourse. "Statham threw everything at him, and he just was never where the attacks were." The father, who had grown up watching Chuck's films in the 1980s, nodded. "That's why he was a champion, before he was ever an actor. What you saw tonight was the difference between someone who learned martial arts for movies and someone who lived martial arts before the cameras ever rolled." Similar conversations echoed throughout the departing crowd, each person taking away their own interpretation of what had unfolded, filtered through their own perspective. Young fans who had arrived wearing Statham merchandise left with a newfound appreciation for Chuck's understated mastery. Older attendees who had dismissed Jason as merely a modern action star now spoke of his humility and willingness to learn with genuine respect. In the VIP lounge, where the after-party continued in full swing, industry executives and stars mingled over drinks, dissecting the evening's unexpected highlight. The room buzzed with animated conversations, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the constant glow of phone screens as people checked the rapidly multiplying social media reactions. "It's absolutely exploding online," a studio executive announced, scrolling through his phone. "Clips of the demonstration have gone viral. Statham's Norris is trending worldwide. Real mastery right behind it." Different narratives emerged depending on the perspective. Younger fans focused on Jason holding his own against a legend. Martial arts purists marveled at Chuck's effortless mastery. Industry veterans recognized the rare authenticity of the exchange. What made the moment so compelling wasn't just what had happened, but how it allowed each viewer to see something personally meaningful reflected in it. The arena's bar had extended its hours to accommodate the post-event crowd, and television screens throughout the space now played highlight reels from the exhibition, with particular focus on the unplanned demonstration. Every time the footage of Chuck's minimal but devastatingly effective movements appeared, conversations paused as people turned to watch, still trying to process what they had witnessed. Jason sat at a corner table, nursing a sparkling water, more subdued than his usual public persona. The constant stream of congratulations and commentary had finally slowed, giving him a moment to process the evening's events. He scrolled through his phone, scanning the early coverage that was already flooding entertainment news sites. One headline caught his eye. "Beyond the Spectacle. What Statham and Norris Taught Us About True Mastery." The byline read, "Mia Torres, Variety." He clicked the link and began reading. In an era defined by carefully curated public images and performative authenticity, tonight the Grand Garden Arena witnessed something increasingly rare. A genuine moment of humility and growth, played out not through words, but through the ancient language of martial discipline. What began as a bold claim by Jason Statham, declaring himself the real action star of our time, transformed into a profound lesson about the nature of mastery itself when Chuck Norris, the 85-year-old legend whose reputation transcends both martial arts and cinema, silently accepted the implicit challenge. The demonstration that followed wasn't the flashy spectacle many expected. Instead, it became a visual essay on two contrasting approaches to martial arts. Statham's dynamic, camera-ready performance versus Norris's quiet, disciplined efficiency. With each exchange, the philosophical gap between showmanship and mastery became increasingly apparent, not through Norris dominating or humiliating the younger star, but through his embodiment of principles that transcend the very concept of competition. "I realized I've been confusing authenticity with visibility," Statham reflected after the demonstration. "There's a deeper level, something beyond what plays well on camera or generates headlines." Jason smiled slightly, appreciating Mia's framing. She had captured the essence of what had transpired, rather than reducing it to celebrity drama or manufactured conflict. He continued reading, nodding as she detailed the philosophical contrast between performance and mastery that had been so vividly demonstrated. The article concluded with an observation that resonated deeply. Perhaps the most powerful moment came not during the public demonstration, but afterward, when Statham, a global action star at the height of his career, approached Norris, not as a competitor or colleague, but as a student seeking guidance. In that gesture, the true lesson of the evening was crystallized. Real strength isn't found in dominating others or claiming superiority, but in the humility to recognize there is always more to learn. Reading his own quoted words, Jason felt a renewed sense of the lesson's impact. It wasn't just about martial arts technique, it was about approaching life itself with greater substance and less concern for appearance. The insight rippled outward, touching aspects of his career, his public persona, even his daily practices that he'd never before questioned. A shadow fell across the table. Jason looked up to find Kai Anderson standing there, expression thoughtful. The young MMA fighter's demeanor had transformed dramatically since their first encounter earlier in the evening, the brash confidence replaced by something more contemplative. "Mr. Statham," Kai said, "I wanted to thank you before leaving." "Thank me?" Jason raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For showing what real strength looks like," Kai said. "Not just physical technique, but," he searched for the right word, "character. The way you received Mr. Plam, Norris's guidance, no ego, just genuine respect and willingness to learn." He shook his head slightly. "That's harder than any physical challenge." Jason studied the young fighter, noting how different his demeanor was from earlier in the evening. "We're all students," he said finally. "Some just forget that sooner than others." Kai nodded, a rueful smile crossing his face. "My first pro fight. I knocked out my opponent in 30 seconds. Magazine called me the future of MMA. After that," he shrugged, "I started believing my own hype. Training became about looking good, showing off, getting those highlight reel moments." "I understand that better than you might think," Jason admitted. "When your success comes from being seen, it's easy to start thinking that's all that matters." "Tonight was a reset button," Kai said. watching you and Mr. Norris, especially afterward. During the private session he allowed us to observe. He paused, gathering his thoughts. It reminded me why I started training in the first place. Not for attention, not for glory, but for the discipline itself. Jason nodded, recognizing his own journey, reflected in the younger man's words. Frank Morgan mentioned you have potential, he said. Not just athletically, but as a true martial artist. Kai's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected praise. That means a lot, coming from him. He's seen it all. He also mentioned you're headlining an event next month in California. Jason continued. I might stop by. I'll be in the area anyway. He didn't elaborate on why the training session with Chuck was still a private matter. Not something to be announced or leveraged for publicity. That would be. Kai struggled to maintain his composure. An honor, sir. They shook hands, and as Kai departed, Jason found himself reflecting on how the evening had created ripples that would extend far beyond the arena walls. The lesson Chuck had delivered wasn't just for him, it was for everyone who witnessed it. Each taking away what they needed most. Across the lounge, Chuck Norris was preparing to leave, declining interviews with polite but firm refusals. Unlike most celebrities who sought to extend their moments in the spotlight, he seemed eager to step away from the attention, to return to the quiet discipline that had defined his life. As he made his way toward the exit, people parted respectfully, many bowing slightly without even realizing they were doing so. It wasn't just his fame, they responded to it was the authentic presence he carried, the embodiment of the philosophy he had demonstrated earlier. Jason rose from his table and crossed the room, catching up to Chuck near the door. Heading out? He asked. Chuck nodded. Long day. I wanted to thank you again, Jason said. For the lesson. Both of them. Actually, the public one and the private one. The learning happens in the reflection afterward. Chuck replied. Not in the moment itself. Jason nodded, understanding the deeper truth in the statement. I've been thinking about what you said. About who you are when no one is watching. He paused, formulating his thoughts. It's changed how I see my work, what I want to bring to it going forward. Chuck studied him for a moment, then offered one of his rare smiles. That's the difference between an actor who does martial arts and a martial artist who acts, he said. One performs the movements. The other lives the philosophy. The distinction resonated deeply with Jason. I'd like to be the latter, he said quietly. The path is there, Chuck replied. Just a matter of walking it daily, cameras or not. They shook hands again, a gesture that now carried the weight of mutual respect rather than competitive acknowledgement. California, Jason confirmed. Next month. Chuck nodded once, then turned and walked away, moving with the same measured calm that characterized everything he did. No grand exit. No fanfare. Just quiet dignity. Jason watched him go, struck by the realization that Chuck's departure from the event embodied the same principles as his martial arts. No wasted movement, no unnecessary flourish, simply doing what was required with perfect efficiency. Even in something as mundane as leaving a party, the philosophy remained consistent. As Chuck disappeared through the exit, several reporters who had been hovering nearby approached Jason, sensing an opportunity for exclusive comments. Jason, what was it like working with Chuck Norris? Any plans for a collaboration with him? What did he say to you just now? Jason considered the questions, recognizing the old pattern, the expectation that every interaction should be leveraged for publicity, transformed into content, packaged for consumption. 24 hours earlier, he would have played along without hesitation, giving them the sound bites they wanted. Instead, he smiled slightly. Some conversations are meant to stay private, he said. But I will say this. Tonight was a reminder of why we practice martial arts in the first place. Not for the cameras, for the discipline itself. The reporters pressed for more, but Jason politely excused himself and returned to the lounge where the industry gathering continued. As he rejoined the conversation, several executives approached with excited proposals. "Jason, we should capitalize on this momentum," one studio head enthused, drink in hand, eyes gleaming with opportunity. "A project with you and Norris passing the torch, old school meets new school. The audience would go crazy. Think of the marketing potential," another chimed in. "The viral clips tonight are just the beginning. We could build an entire campaign around this generational showdown." Jason considered their enthusiasm, understanding the business logic behind it. The industry survived on moments like these unexpected cultural touchpoints that could be transformed into profitable ventures. And yet, something felt wrong about commercializing what had transpired. "Maybe," he replied noncommittally, "but not right away. And only if the story has substance." He found himself reevaluating projects through a new lens, not just what would look impressive on screen or generate opening weekend numbers, but what carried authentic meaning. The executives exchanged glances, not quite understanding his hesitation but knowing better than to push. They moved on to other topics. But Jason noticed how his perspective on even these routine industry conversations had shifted. The constant focus on spectacle, on outdoing what came before, on capturing attention at any cost, it all seemed slightly hollow now, divorced from the substance he had glimpsed in those quiet moments with Chuck. As the night wound down, Mia Torres approached for a final comment. "Your article captured it well," Jason said, nodding toward her tablet. "Thank you for seeing beyond the surface." "I try," she said with a slight smile. "But I'm more interested in what happens next. Has this experience changed your approach going forward?" Jason considered the question carefully. "I entered this evening calling myself the real action star," he said finally. "I still believe in bringing authenticity to action, cinema, doing my own stunts, training properly, respecting the craft. But I've realized there's a deeper authenticity that has nothing to do with what audiences see on screen. Which is the discipline that happens when the cameras are off," Jason said. "The daily practice, the constant improvement, the humility to keep learning." He smiled slightly. "The real work happens in the dojo, not on the red carpet." Mia nodded, recognizing the genuine shift in perspective. "Any final thoughts on Chuck Norris, the man behind the legend?" Jason glanced toward the exit where Chuck had departed. "He reminded me that true masters don't need to tell you they're masters," he said. "They simply embody the principles so completely that it speaks for itself." He paused. "I've got a long way to go, but I'm grateful for the reminder of what the destination looks like." Later, as the VIP lounge finally emptied, and event staff began the process of breaking down the elaborate staging, Jason found himself alone for a moment, standing at the edge of the now vacant demonstration area where everything had unfolded hours earlier. The bright lights had been dimmed, the cheering crowd long gone. In the quiet, empty space, the essential nature of what had occurred seemed clearer somehow. Stripped of spectacle and reduced to its core truth. Two practitioners, one path, different stages of the journey. Jason moved to the center of the space, settled into the stance Chuck had adjusted for him, feeling the difference in his balance, the efficiency of the position. He threw a single punch, focusing not on how it looked but on the intent behind it. The energy projected through it, rather than ending at impact. In the empty arena, with no audience to perform for, he began moving through a simple kata, each movement deliberate, focused, present. No cameras captured it. No fans cheered. No headlines would be written about this private moment of practice. And that, he realized, was precisely the point of Chuck's most important lesson. The moment when no one was watching was the moment that mattered most. Across town, in his hotel suite, Chuck Norris completed his evening routine with the same disciplined approach that had defined his life for over 60 years. No matter where he traveled, certain practices remained: constant meditation, reflection, connection to the principles that had guided him, from competition rings to movie sets to tonight's unexpected teaching opportunity. At 85, he moved with the controlled fluidity of a much younger man. His lifetime of discipline evident in every deliberate action. His routine never varied, regardless of circumstance: 20 minutes of meditation, a series of mobility exercises, and time spent in reflection before sleep. Tonight's reflection centered on Jason Statham, not with judgment or comparison, but with thoughtful consideration of the younger man's journey. Chuck had recognized something in him during their exchange: a genuine hunger for authenticity beneath the carefully constructed public image. It was the same hunger that had driven his own path decades earlier, though in a different context, under different pressures. The world would frame tonight's events as a competition or a passing of the torch. Entertainment media would search for conflict narratives, for winners and losers, for dramatic arcs that could be packaged into digestible content. But Chuck knew it was something more fundamental: the eternal cycle of teaching and learning that kept martial arts wisdom alive across generations. He completed his final stretches, then settled onto the meditation cushion he carried with him everywhere. Eyes closed, breath steady, he embodied the same centered presence that had made his demonstration so compelling hours earlier. No performance, no audience, just disciplined practice, as it had been every night for decades. The true victory of the evening wasn't what the public had witnessed. It was this moment, the private continuation of principles demonstrated publicly. The consistency between outer action and inner practice. The integrity of the path. Meanwhile, at a downtown restaurant, Frank Morgan sat with Kai Anderson and several other young fighters, using napkins and silverware to diagram key principles they had witnessed earlier. The impromptu teaching session had begun when they'd arrived for a late dinner and hadn't stopped since, the young fighters hungry for wisdom in a way they hadn't been before tonight's demonstration. What Norris showed tonight wasn't just technique, Frank explained, rearranging the utensils to demonstrate a concept. It was philosophy in motion. The principle of minimum effort for maximum effect applies to everything: fighting, career, life itself. Kai nodded, absorbing the lesson with newfound humility. "I've been training wrong," he admitted to the group, focusing on what looks impressive rather than what works effectively. "It's a common mistake," Frank said, understanding in his voice. "Especially in an era of social media highlights and viral clips. You're not alone in that." He pushed the salt shaker forward to illustrate his next point. "But remember what happened tonight. When Statham threw his flashiest techniques, Norris barely moved yet controlled the entire exchange. That's mastery." He looked around the table at the young fighters, seeing in their attentive faces the potential for genuine growth. "The question isn't whether you can knock someone out spectacularly," he continued. "It's whether you need to. Real mastery isn't about dominating opponents, it's about transcending the need to prove yourself at all." The young fighters nodded, perspectives permanently altered by what they had witnessed. None of them had come to the exhibition expecting a philosophical awakening. Yet each was leaving with exactly that, a new understanding of what it meant to walk the martial path with integrity. "I want to train differently," Kai said finally. "Not just physically, mentally, philosophically." Frank smiled slightly. "That's where it begins," he said. With that recognition, the lesson would spread through training gyms and dojos, influencing the next generation of martial artists in ways that extended far beyond a single exhibition event. In a culture obsessed with spectacle and immediate validation, the seeds of a counter-narrative had been planted, one that valued patience, discipline, and internal mastery over external recognition. Elsewhere in the city, in her hotel room, Mia Torres put the finishing touches on her feature article. Unlike her usual entertainment coverage, this piece delved deeper, exploring the philosophical contrast between performance and mastery, between external validation and internal discipline. She titled it simply, "The Silent Master," capturing in 3 words the essence of what Chuck Norris had demonstrated not through speeches or declarations, but through the quiet authority of lifetime discipline. As she reviewed her final draft, she reflected on her own profession, how often journalism itself privileged spectacle over substance, conflict over nuance, simplified narratives over complex truths. Tonight had reminded her why she'd become a journalist in the first place, not to chase clicks or manufacture drama, but to bear witness to authentic moments of human experience and share them with depth and integrity. She added a final paragraph. In a culture increasingly driven by performance metrics, views, likes, shares, box office numbers, tonight's unexpected demonstration offered a radical alternative. The possibility that our most meaningful work happens when no one is watching. That true mastery isn't about being seen, but about seeing clearly. That real strength isn't found in dominating others, but in mastering oneself. It's a lesson that transcends martial arts, speaking to how we might approach not just action cinema, but action itself with purpose, presence, and the quiet confidence that comes from walking a disciplined path. As dawn broke over Las Vegas the following morning, the Action Cinema Legacy exhibition had officially concluded. Crews dismantled stages, packed equipment, and loaded trucks. Social media continued to buzz with clips and commentary about the unexpected highlight between Statham and Norris. But beyond the viral moments and entertainment headlines, something more significant had occurred. A genuine transmission of wisdom that would ripple outward in ways that couldn't be measured by view counts or trending topics. Jason Statham boarded his private jet, Chuck Norris's business card in his pocket. A calendar reminder set for their training session the following month. As the plane taxied for takeoff, he scrolled through messages from his agent, a flood of new project offers, seeking to capitalize on the previous night's viral moment. He found himself evaluating each proposal differently than he would have just 24 hours earlier. The questions that now mattered weren't about billing or budget, but about substance and authenticity. Not, "How will this look?" but, "What truth does this contain?" One script in particular caught his attention, a story about an aging martial artist teaching inner-city youth, focusing on discipline and self-respect rather than fighting. 6 months ago, he would have dismissed it as lacking commercial appeal. Now, he flagged it for further consideration, seeing potential for something meaningful. It was a subtle shift, but a profound one, the beginning of a transformation from performer to practitioner, from star to student. As the plane lifted into the morning sky, Jason closed his eyes and settled into the adjusted stance Chuck had taught him, feeling its balance and efficiency, even while seated. The physical lesson was an entry point to something deeper, a philosophy of presence, authenticity, and continuous improvement that extended far beyond martial technique. In his mind, he returned to the moment when Chuck had stood before him, demonstrating the difference between appearance and essence, with nothing more than a simple shift in intention. "The most powerful technique is invisible until needed," he had said. Words that applied not just to martial arts, but to character itself. And in that transformation lay the true victory of the evening, not a triumph of one man over another, but the eternal victory of wisdom shared and received with open hands and humble heart. Because in the end, The greatest strength isn't found in dominating others, but in mastering oneself, a lesson not taught through words, but demonstrated through a lifetime of quiet discipline. A lesson now passed to a new generation, ensuring that true mastery would continue its silent, powerful journey through time. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.